Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you for having me, Ken. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm excited to dive in. We're just meeting today. You've got an incredible story. I know you've been very successful as an entrepreneur and helping others. Where did this start for you? I know this didn't come easy by any means. Can you give us your backstory?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I was born into quite a dysfunctional family. I was born in a part of London, East London, Bethnal Green, quite rough, very poor. My father was an alcoholic, used to beat up my mum a lot. My mum was amazing, very supportive, but we didn't have much. I was dyslexic, so schooling was really tough for me. I was really fortunate that I was helped by a charity. There was a charity in that part of London that was supported by the royal family called the Prince's Trust. And I was helped by that charity from age 5 right through to age 16. It was a charity for disadvantaged children. It involved riding motorbikes. So I used to go away every weekend, and it was seen as respite away from disruptive homes. So I used to go away every weekend and every school holiday, which was quite tough age 5, but it meant I spent a lot of time away from home, and I saw a different way to life than what my life was Monday to Friday. But I struggled my way through schooling. Eventually ended up being bullied, then becoming the bully. Went to 3 different senior schools because I kept on getting expelled for either not turning up or for fighting. And eventually I left school at 16 before sitting any qualifications, and started my first business, which was cleaning people's windows. And I've started businesses ever since, and I've started and built two significant sized businesses, and I own now 2 businesses outright and a portfolio of 13 around the world through my venture fund, Five
Beautiful.
Starters.
When you were growing up, when you were going through you're getting help from the Princess Trust. By the way, I mean, I'm just being a dumb American here, but does the Princess Trust do like a concert every year or something like that? I feel like there's maybe they do several things, but I feel like I
Do
recognize.
several things. They
Okay.
do. They do. No, you're right, Ken. And the reason that you would have thought about that is that we do one in, I say we do one because I did the full circle. I went from being supported by the trust to just spending 3.5 years as chair over there. But we put on some big events supported by the royal family in New York and in London. So we've
Okay.
got quite a big American following, and we've started to do some real charitable things, mainly on the East Coast. But how can you help, again, less advantaged people get into work or get into business?
Yeah, I noticed even on your Wikipedia that you've been back helping the institutions that helped you. But I'm curious so you're 5 years old when they start helping you out. You're 5 or 6, I'm guessing, when you start getting to take these trips that get you out of your environment and get you exposed to something else. And there was something you said kind of quickly, but I want to dive in. Is you kind of said I was getting exposed to, I'm completely paraphrasing, but you got exposed to some different things. Do you recall like having a conscious thought pattern as a young boy of going, okay, my environment or this model of the world as I've been seeing it is maybe not the way I want my model of the world to be? Because I just had a very similar experience. I'm going to sidebar just for a second, but my sister was just visiting, and we had some challenges growing up as well. And our as everybody does, our lives have taken a bit of a different path. But in the sense of any trauma or challenge, I sort of took it as a lesson of what I didn't want to do. You know what I mean, or didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And she is still struggling with it even to this point, and she would admit that. She'll probably hear this podcast, so hi Dawn. Um, but it sounds like for you it was like, hey, there's a better way. Is that maybe what you saw, or at least a different way, or something to aspire to?
Yeah, Ken, you're so right, and I can relate to the conversation about your sister too. But yeah, for me, I have I have distinct memories of a childhood when things were. I've got a distinct memory of 2 or 3 episodes that were really negative, like seeing my father be aggressive towards my mum for the first time and stuff like that. But I don't have 100 memories of this being a constant in my life. But what I do have hundreds of memories of is sat on that bus with the charity, heading out to the countryside to go away for the weekend and looking out the window for 3 hours and seeing, we lived in a flat above a shop, you know, an apartment, two-bedroom apartment above a shop. When I saw that some people had houses where they could park their cars, some people had houses where the house next to them wasn't adjoined to them. Some
Right.
people had houses with two double front doors. And
Right.
I distinctively remember all of those thoughts. And I distinctly remember thinking, I wonder what you do to get that. And I started building these patterns of what type of car belongs to what type of home, to what type of individual, who was I seeing walking the streets. And even as a young 6, 7 year old, I was starting to build up this, I guess, this sort of almost this life plan of what I needed to do to be different. And then expanding on your story with your wife, now my elder brother took all of the negatives from our childhood and still lives with them today.
Right.
And so it is really it is strange. And a lot of the times I say, well, I was really lucky. I had a really supportive mother, regardless of what else was going on. And I've never really tried to decompose it to think, well, maybe actually, maybe there was something just about me that saw the negatives as you say, not something I want to happen to me, not what I want my adulthood to be. So
Right.
I started to seek out alternative routes. And I was very fortunate, you know, I mean, being helped by a charity for 11 years as a child. Now, don't get me wrong, it took a lot of effort from both my mother and me. I had to get up at 6 a.m. and get there. And I had to be, you know, it was a military based display team. I had to be bossed around and taught to march and clean my kit and iron my clothes. So I had to turn up every day too from a young age. And I've never really thought of what inside me made me do that. But I guess it was just I could see. Sometimes I think if you're born into poverty and in a small area, you only see what is in around, which is
Sure.
directly around you. And I was very fortunate that constantly I was seeing that there was something better. And if you're constantly seeing that something is better, it's difficult to ignore it.
Yeah, but to see it, you got to be looking for it, right? And it's hard to look for it if you're so intertwined with what hasn't gone right, what the bad breaks are. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong. I mean, people have gone through, really, really tough stuff, and I get it, and it's going to take time sometimes. But yeah, a little hard to. Most kids aren't looking out the window of a bus going, "Oh, that'd be nice to have a driveway." You know that. Oh, swimming pool. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, possibilities. But if there's abuse at home, if there's neglect at home, if there's challenges at school, most people are so in the problem that they're not really looking out at what the possibilities are. Yeah, I can still relate. I remember like taking mental notes, um, literally mental notes of like, like I'd see behavior from an adult, um, and I go, okay, you got it wrong. Like in my head, it's just like, you got it
Yeah.
wrong. I'll do it different. And kind of repeating that stuff over time. Did you know how did the various learning disabilities bubble up? Because I know you're colorblind, dyslexia. I think I think I've only named two of the four things I think that you had, but
ADHD and ADHD
ADHD.
and POC. Um,
When did I mean, did that become apparent immediately, or sometimes I feel like it's sometimes diagnosed through so and so's not performing well, so and so's not showing up well, so and so's acting up. Was it more of an official diagnosis or something that came through? I guess the pain of not succeeding in school and then having to dig into what's causing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I distinctively remember, you know, from around age 7 or 8, you go from being rewarded every day at school for turning up, dressing well, trying hard, to your education attainment. And I went from being given certificates once a week or twice a week to getting none. And I remember that time it's quite an emotive feeling thinking back to that and thinking, what's going on? Why can't I do this? You know? And I'm 45, so I was born in 1979, and dyslexia really wasn't a thing in the mid 80s, late 80s either, into the early 90s. So I was just categorized as somebody that was less able, a bit slow was the terminology used. And then by the time I got to senior school, age 11 or 12, in the UK, you get put into senior schools based upon where you live, but also your what's called an 11 plus exam. And I scored so badly that I could only go to the worst possible school. But all my friends who I'd grown up with and had a great friendship with were all off to the best school. And when I got into the worst school, I didn't want to go. And I turned up and I was bullied. I referred to it earlier on. I became the bully. But I always knew, I think by the time I got to about age 14 or 15, by the time now I'm still in the charity, I'm going through the rank system of the charity, which is a military based ranking system. So by age 14, I had gone through Lance Corporal, Corporal, and I was probably heading for my sergeant certificate in the motorcycle charity. So I knew I had leadership skills, but I couldn't understand why I couldn't do the other stuff. And it was really frustrating. Dyslexia wasn't really spoken about. And I guess I thought to myself, I'm maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just a little bit thick, maybe I just don't get this stuff. But that sort of again, it spurred me on to think, but I'm really good at this. I'm really good manager of people, a leadership role. Because, by the time I was age 15, age 14, I became sergeant of the motorcycle team, which meant I had four corporals reporting into me. By the time I was 16, I was team captain. I was responsible for 44 other children. So
Sure.
I knew I had some skills. They just weren't recognized in the education system. And by that time, I just opted out. I thought, you know what? I can't be bothered. You guys don't understand me. I don't understand myself. I'm just going to do what I find naturally good, which is to try and be a leader, lead by example. I always had loads of energy, which is probably partially to do with my ADHD, but I always had lots of desire and get up and go. And I decided to focus on that. And wasn't actually, I spent my entire adult life hiding the fact that I was dyslexic. I knew age 20, 21 that I was dyslexic, but I hid it. And I spent my entire life trying to hide it because I thought people wouldn't do business with me if they knew I was. And it was only when I was 36, I sold my first business for about $75 million. I went from being poor to being very, very wealthy. It was only then that I felt confident enough to come out and go, get my diagnosis and go, you know what? I'm dyslexic.
Yeah.
It means it doesn't matter. And that's why I'm on such a journey now with, having researched and written the Dyslexic Edge, my new book. I'm on such a journey to not to beat up the education system, not to tell governments they need to change, because that's anybody can stand up and tell government they need to change. What I want to do is I want people to change the narrative of around dyslexia. Dyslexia doesn't equal low IQ. It's
Right.
quite the opposite.
Well, and there were some things I learned in the book, some of the stats that are in there that 15%, I mean, 15% of the population has dyslexia. I think it was 45% of entrepreneurs. Am I getting that right? 45%?
35% of entrepreneurs are
35.
dyslexic, but 40% of self-made millionaires across the US and the UK.
And so, God, I mean, that blend of statistics is crazy because, well, 15%, first of all, I think is way higher than most people
Mm.
would have guessed. It was certainly way higher than I would have guessed. But then there's this direct correlation to people with dyslexia having a higher chance of starting a business. And if they start a business, running it to the point where they could exit for $1 million or more. And we'd be foolish not to dive into that mindset or the way that that person operates to try to find out what are the lessons that you can extract. So rather than isolating it and going, you're in special ed, you guys can go work out of the trailer over there. What we should be doing is going, okay, show me that math problem the way you did it, because maybe there's something, maybe you have a better way, even though it's not the way the majority of people are doing it. And I'm constantly surprised by the number of people I meet. It almost seems like the more successful they are, there is something in the way that they're wired that is different. I mean, come on, Steve Jobs had to have been on the spectrum. He
Yeah.
used to break computers apart from the inside. He'd get so obsessed, you know what I mean? And that,
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the iPhone, Steve Jobs is thought to be dyslexic. The iPhone, light, flight, or the Wright brothers were dyslexic. The reality is, like, Alexa, if we're going to resolve climate change, it will probably be a dyslexic thinker. It will definitely be someone with some neurodivergency. It just will. I
Right.
mean, look at the stuff that Elon Musk is achieving. You just simply don't achieve that unless you think very differently. And that's the thing about dyslexia. I don't. Most people tend to lean towards either dyslexia as a deficit or it's a superpower. And I don't think it's useful to put it into either camp. It's definitely got a lot of great qualities to it. And what we try to do in the book the book isn't just for those with dyslexia. In fact, it will be more valuable for those without dyslexia, because at the end of every chapter, we pull out the dyslexic thinking traits from all of these really successful dyslexic people throughout the world. And we say, if you implement this type of thinking for your own personal development or your business development, these are some of the benefits. I mean, we were really lucky. We got access to some of the most amazing people around the world. I went and spent a whole day and evening with Paul Orfala, the founder of Kinko Print. Paul set up his business with $5,000. It ended up on the US stock exchange for about $4.1 billion.
Wow.
It took a very special kind of person to build that organization. And what I got was unlimited access to these people, to get their life story out. So not just this is how you succeed. It's really easy to find 75-year-old rich white men tell you how easy it was. And what we try to do in the book is we try to make sure we've got diversity across these dyslexic thinkers: Asian women, Black men, Israeli Americans, Hispanic. And we really try and get a good mix of people, because dyslexia is definitely on a spectrum, but also your own circumstances at the time that you're going through the most difficult periods, which is generally childhood, really does have an impact on the outcomes. You can imagine it would be much easier as a white American to go through dyslexia in the 80s than it would have been for an African American to go through
Sure.
dyslexia in the 80s. And we do need to recognize that. So I don't think it's very useful just to simply go around telling people dyslexia is a superpower, get over it, get on, it
Right.
will be okay.
Right. Right. But it can be right for the right people. And really
Absolutely.
what we're talking about is at least the way I'm thinking about it is like the uniqueness of thought, or a different perspective, or a different way of approaching things, and that we should maybe, pay attention to that. You said, so there's a certain point where you're starting to struggle in school, identity's getting challenged, but you're sort of rooting your identity in some of the things that you're doing well at, like leadership, and you're starting to expand there. You parlay that into starting a company. The company starts doing well. I imagine that during that time, you're like, well, I'm just a guy that's going to carve my own path, right? Traditional methods aren't going to work. You're in your early 20s. Um, did you decide, like, I guess during that time of building that first company, did you know that you were going to start leaning heavier into this community, or like, when did that hit? Was it sort of the gratitude that you felt after you sold the company and like, hey, maybe I should shout this from the rooftops a little bit more? Or like, when did that come into play?
It's such a great question, because there was a number of things that happened in sequence. So 2017, I sold my first business. I decided I wanted to, I was really wealthy, I had some time on my hands, and I decided I wanted to do an MBA. I'd done some executive education at Stanford and a school in the UK called Cranfield. And I thought I'd love to do an executive MBA. So I wrote, but I only wanted to do one for one of the best universities in the world. I wrote to Harvard, Stanford, and London Business School. Harvard ignored me. Stanford responded and gave me a video interview, and LBS did too. And my proposal to them was, wouldn't it be great to take an entrepreneur without any qualifications whatsoever and let them do a master's in business without having to do any, postgrad?
Right.
And wouldn't it be great for your brand? And Stanford entertained me, but I think we're like, we don't need you to be good for our brand.
Sure.
Our brand is strong enough. And LBS said, yeah, we would love to give you a go. But during that interview, they said, do you think you might be dyslexic? And I was trying to hide it, right? I'm like, no, 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 never. Like, when do I start? Where do I send the check to? When do I start? And they asked if I would sit the assessment. I went and sat the assessment, and I tried really hard not to be found out, because I'd spent 37 years trying not to be found out.
Sure.
And I was diagnosed with dyslexia. Now, my wife, who was only just my wife at this stage, I think, was dyslexic, but went to a very good school, fee-paying school in the UK, and went on to university, got a degree. So I knew, I was starting to see that dyslexia didn't really mean stupid. So why was I hiding it? And then we had our first children, and then the school started to talk to us about our youngest, and there were signs that she might be dyslexic, which isn't a surprise, it is hereditary. And then by chance, well, not by chance, but I happened to get to spend some time with one of the most famous dyslexic people on earth. I got to spend some time with Sir Richard Branson, the owner of all things Virgin. And Richard and I went on a bike ride one day, and we were cycling around, and I was talking to him. My wife happened to go to school with Richard's daughter, so we were talking about that. I was talking about dyslexia, ADHD, sleep issues. And Richard and I got onto the conversation of why is all the literature on this stuff generally written by academics and focusing on the negatives of it rather than case study led, focusing on the positives of it. And it was that night I was having a cocktail. Richard came back up to me in the bar and was like, "Are you going to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I think I will." And I spent the next week. I was on Necker Island. I spent the next week casually doing a bit of research here and there to make sure that nobody else had done it. If they had they done it well? What could a potential title be? And then I came home and I got stuck in straight away. And I spent 2 years working with one of the brightest minds in dyslexia, Dr. Helen Taylor, and took all of her 20 years of research, went and interviewed all of these new people, and put together a construct of which was launched a month ago and has landed as an amazing book in the Dyslexic Edge. And so I guess to answer your question in less words, the original passion was I was petrified of my daughter being badged with something that was still widely seen as such a negative. And I thought, do I wait and do I try and help her from the sidelines, or do I try and help the world and in the process help my daughter? Mm-hmm. And I decided that it's going to be the same amount of energy to help her go through it in a positive way that it's going to take for me to try and help millions of people from each edge of the globe by telling other people's stories, promoting this message, and doing what I've done through the Dyslexic Edge. So,
and you also, I have to imagine that had to be extremely freeing for you.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean, how did? Because again, there's so many instances in school and in business where I listened to you on another podcast where you change your writing so that people couldn't recognize the spelling, right? And just kind of, and you're having to think about it consciously all the time, I would think, right? Hey, go up and solve that problem on the chalkboard. Hey, and there's got to be like, oh, I got to pull out this excuse when this happens. I've got to do it this way when this happens. And even in business, even though you're the owner of the business, which allows you a little more control over the environment, but you still can't control everything, and yeah, that's got to be tough. I'd have to think that it would feel, I stopped using alcohol a few years ago and was hiding it at different times. And I remember I just wanted to stop, but I didn't expect the freedom, and where I think the freedom was associated with was personal integrity. You've talked from the very beginning about as a child being a leader, gravitating towards leadership, having 44 people at age 16 or 44 kids at age 16, starting your company, now having 1,000 people or so under management, but keeping that part of you in, right? Yeah. And I have to think it would align really well with your own personal brand, personal ethics, right?
You're so right. And one of the things I don't talk about it much, and I decided not to focus on it in the book, but it is something at the back of my mind, which is how many people how do people deal with their dyslexia? So you mentioned alcohol there. We know that there are links between ADHD and alcohol abuse, because people trying to quieten their minds so that they can sleep, etc. But there were definitely there were things that I saw in the 2 years through writing the book about dyslexia that I decided not to focus on, because I wanted the book to be around a more balanced view rather than just get headline grabbing, that dyslexic people turn to alcohol.
Mhm.
But when you're not being yourself, with that be, let's say you were homosexual and you didn't want to tell people that and you were keeping it to yourself, well, it's highly likely that behind closed doors you're being quite self-destructive to yourself, because
Sure.
putting on that display all the time, lying, because you're lying to the world every day, is so difficult to deal with. And that might be, addiction to video games, addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, addiction to porn. I don't know, but that I think there are probably quite strong links between dyslexia and other negative things that go on in people's life. And I think that's really unfair. And that's why I'm on this movement, that the sooner you can come out, the sooner you can say, I am dyslexic, the better. I have had more success since 2017 and more personal gratitude, and developed myself personally more than I did for the first 36 years of life. So in the
Sure.
last 9, it's been better than the prior 36. That is grossly unfair that I had to hide it for 36, because I believed that society wasn't willing to accept it.
Yeah, I mean that's such a good point. And I would have to imagine the amount of, yeah, just personal growth and everything that you've had since then has been huge. Because again, you're not carrying this weight, this mental weight around with you. What's your goal in this whole process? The book is huge. It's getting, great responses. You're obviously really well connected. You've been on tons of podcasts and TV and everything else. Are you This is different, right? You're involved in, I think, 13 companies. This is different. This is more like a mission. Yeah. So, in this mission, where are you trying to take it?
It's really interesting. So I don't think I ever I started this because I wanted to help my daughter, and I thought, can I help? Should I restrict it to helping Allegra, or should I help others in the process? And I decided to help others in the process. And it was Dyslexia Awareness Week just a week ago, which was exhausting. I was doing radio show, TV shows, interviews, trying to run my businesses, and I got to Friday morning and I was pretty tired. And somebody put something on social media. This guy videoed himself talking about his daughter and how he had listened to this podcast and it had changed his life, and it was going to change. Emily was his daughter's name. It's going to change her life. And I watched it and I thought, wow. And I get emails and letters every day from people, but this had such an impact on me. And then I was just on my way to the radio show, onto a radio show, and a friend of mine called, and I picked up the phone to him, and he's like, "How you doing?" And I said, "Michael, I need to run. I've got about to go live on air." I said, "To be honest with you, I'm pretty tired actually. This has been a lot to take on. I hadn't really considered it." And I said, "It's quite noisy out there with dyslexia at the moment." And he said to me, "Jamie, just listen to me for 2 minutes before you go on radio. If I can give you one piece of advice, just go a little bit further than you think you want to." And that was all he said. And I said, "Thank you, Michael." And I put down the phone. And while I was on the radio show, I really thought about that remark. And I thought, he's so right. There's a big burden when you go out to try and help people and change so many people's lives. You take this huge burden of weight on, right? And it never stops. So yesterday morning, I woke up and a lady from Australia. This is a lovely story. So I woke up yesterday morning. I haven't responded to her yet, actually. I got an email to say it's 4 a.m. here in Australia. My son has just returned from the Paris Olympics. He was representing our country. I'll be a little prescriptive of what his injury was and stuff, just in case people try and dot the lines. He had an injury. He has come home. He's gone into a deep sense of depression. I can't get him out of his bedroom. He's 24 years of age. He's always suffered with dyslexia and ADHD. Would you please, if I can get him to agree, do a 30-minute call with him? He needs to hear your story to reset himself. I'm just a concerned mother. And I know I can't say no to that, but I also know I can't say yes to
To
a
all of
thousand of
yes,
those.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really, really tough. It's a big burden to take on. And I want to help, millions of people. So I guess what I'm trying to say in probably too many words is I will continue on this journey and push this message for as long as I am able to, and to help as many people as possible on that route. But at some stage, it might mean that I have to get off that ride and pass the baton to somebody else for my own sanity and
Yeah.
well-being. But at the moment, I'm listening to my friend Michael Heppel, who says just go that bit further than you think you might want to. And at the moment, that seems like quite a way away. So
No,
one
that's
step in front of the other. How do you run a marathon?
exactly. And I think as long as you have guardrails on so you can maintain quality of life and the things that you need to do, then that's awesome. Do you I spaced out here for a second. Hold on 1 second if you could for me, Jamie. I'm gonna pop. All right, so Jamie, switching gears. We got onto another subject, which is really interesting. But when we were going over some of the stats that you found in the book, were you surprised? I mean, I know you probably weren't surprised to find a number of, great thinkers, smart people, stuff like that. But as a overall statistic, like when you saw stuff like 15% of the population, 35% of entrepreneurs, like, were you like, wow, like these are some really big numbers?
Yeah, I really was. So when I got the statistics through, the first thing I did was go, hey, this can't be right. So I
Right.
really challenged them back to Professor Dr. Helen Taylor, saying, are you sure? Let me dive beneath the data. And I'm a very data orientated person anyway. But then it added fuel to the fire, because then I was like, hang on a second. 15 out of every 100, 1.5 people in every 10 people, one in every eight that's in a classroom is going through this. Are you sure? And we have decided to do nothing about it? That's crazy. And so I actually came at it from that desire, not of the, well, 40% of self-made millionaires, we should grab onto that. I actually started with, this is crazy. I thought I was like the one person in the whole school that was going through this.
Right.
Not that there were two of me in every class.
Right.
That's really different. And then when you start to get into, and one of the statistics we haven't spoken about, but is a very real statistic too, is that 50% of all US prisoners are dyslexic.
That's where I was going to go next. What's your theory behind that?
Well, I think my theory is, I mean, the research in the book points towards these two different characters that are born into society, this explorer versus exploiter. So if you look at the positive traits of dyslexia, they match perfect to those of explorer. So Dr. Helen Taylor's research will tell you that actually dyslexia is nothing more than a badge we've given to people that are explorers. And because the education system is designed incorrectly to enable them to learn in the same way. So if you think about the traits of an explorer, that pushing the boundaries, that desire to succeed, to explore, to find against all costs, against all the risks, against all the elements, and when they fail, to keep going again, you can see how that might lead to successful businesses or
Sure.
might lead to successful crime. And again, we go back to that. It really is dependent on where you are as a child and what support
Right.
network you have around you on where you are going to go. So some of the work I did with the Prince's Trust, which is now called the King's Trust here in the UK, was to go into prisons to talk to these people, to say, look, you might be here through no fault of your own. You were always going to be that one that pushed against the boundaries and did things in this way because you were born an explorer. Now, when you leave this prison, it's going to be really tough for you to apply for a job.
Right.
But you know what? To start a business is simple. GoDaddy doesn't ask if you've got a criminal record when you're buying a
Sure.
domain, right? You will be able to do this. And we did a lot of work in trying to, because it's really difficult to get people pre-prison. It's really, really difficult. And in most countries, in most developed countries around the world, once you're in prison, your time is marked.
Right.
It's considered a bit too late because they go, wow, it's pointless. The reoffender rate is up at 70%. It's just the way they are. It's
Right.
not. It's because when they come out, they had less opportunity than when they went in. So they have to go back to offending. So we spent a lot of time, and maybe it's somewhere that I would like to explore a bit more over the coming years with dyslexia, which is, it's really important to help those with dyslexia as early as humanly possible.
Right.
And, one of the statistics I should point out is that the two biggest barriers to children getting help with dyslexia are first, their own parents, and second, school teachers. And when you dive into the data on that and think, well, why? Well, how would that be? Well, parents simply think, they'll grow out of it. So they leave it,
Right.
they leave it. Well, Johnny's a boy, he learns a bit slower than Emily because she's a girl. And then by the time it's gone too far, they forget about it. And teachers are really worried about getting children diagnosed because they know that their school doesn't have the resource to support it. And they've built a relationship with little Johnny. They don't want to see Johnny go off into an environment where, so teachers go, I'll help him. They're going home with this pain every night thinking, I think Johnny's dyslexic, but I don't want him to be diagnosed. There's nowhere for him to go. We don't have the resource. I'll just give him some extra help.
Yeah, we'll work through it.
Unfortunately, they're not great solutions. People with dyslexia do need it to be diagnosed and it to be recognized so that they can get the learning system. Just it seems too difficult to believe that it will ever change. It has never changed. One of the questions I get a lot at the moment, as you can imagine, is, do you think with AI that the learning system will change where dyslexics, those with dyslexia, are not at a disadvantage? And my answer at the moment is simply most education systems don't even allow Microsoft spell check.
Right.
Why
You
are they
know,
going to allow AI?
you don't learn how to balance your bank account. I mean, until you get a bank account. So um, that would be not only progressive, but like a monumental effort on on a worldwide basis to have that. But could the solution or part of a solution be privately funded schools um, that focus on that? I mean, I don't know, just thinking out loud.
I think there's a hybrid solution actually,
Hmm.
because I think asking the world to rewrite the system. I think the system of learning was in the main created by the church because they didn't want knowledge drain. People were dying mid-30s, and they didn't want the story of the Bible to be forgotten. So it was very much you read, you memorize, and you write. We know that that's not suitable for 15% of the population, but I think trying to design something completely new is probably too much to ask because some might say, well, it is only 15% of the population. But I don't, from my research, there's nothing that points towards the way people with dyslexia learn better, sort of smaller chunks of time, more visual, time to roam on their feet rather than sit. There is no reasonable statistical evidence that points towards any of that would have a negative impact on those that learn in a normal environment.
Sure.
So why wouldn't you implement some of those very quick wins straight away? So 20-minute lessons rather than 60-minute lessons. Double math lessons, it's just a no-go. It should never happen.
Right.
7-minute breaks between each 20-minute session to roam, more visual, less quiet time. That there's no evidence that I've seen that points towards that would be negative on the 85%. So if that's correct, then maybe we should start to introduce some of these really quick early wins into mainstream education, and that with a little bit of additional support, which can now probably be given through sensible tech platforms. Khan Academy is brilliant at this, and others. You shouldn't have to take children out of classrooms into porta cabins or trailers anymore.
Right.
You should be able to give them additional technology that can support them to stay in their environment, but bring in some hybrid learning technology techniques that would, in my opinion, just benefit us all.
Really good point. Yeah, because even when I was thinking about, let's say there was, you're friends with Richard Branson, you've got decent capital yourself. Let's say you guys started a school there in London. It still keeps people separated, right? So even if it's a brilliant way to educate, my idea, the separate 15%, great. They felt part of a community. They got educated probably better than they would have otherwise. But now they still got to go integrate into a workforce that maybe does or does not accept them because they, you know what I mean? Because they
No,
know
I,
different.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, and
Yeah, I mean, you
we've
lived it, but yeah.
I've lived it. Yeah, and we have all known for at least the last 20 years that diversity in management teams and leadership teams delivers better results. Right? We
Sure.
know that female, male, African American, white American. We know that the greater the mix of diversity in decision making has better outcomes. So to not consider those with ADHD, dyslexia, and others into that mix is a little bit crazy because they can bring so much value to those decisions.
Yeah.
And so that it seems silly to segregate it at a young age to then try and integrate it at a later age. We need to keep this as integrated as possible, and change and just adapt. I'm conscious that it's so easy. I hear people stand up every day say that the learning system is wrong and it needs to be changed. Now that's a big statement and it's an easy statement to make. It's much more difficult to resolve. I don't want to be that person, but can we do those simple things? I would list the top 5 things, and off the top of my head, the first one would be 20-minute lessons. Business schools have known this for what for donkey's years. You go to Harvard or Stanford, you're doing maximum 40-minute sessions with a coffee break halfway through,
Sure.
maximum. So how it's not found its way into mainstream education is beyond me. But that you've got to allow people to learn more visually, and I think reading and writing in quiet, not looking over your shoulder, don't collaborate with the person sat next to you because that's called cheating. That is just a little bit nonsense, right? We all know that that's not how things work.
I
Can you
think
imagine if you
also,
put 6-year-olds to collaborate and work together to solve big problems? And that big problem for them might be to write a story about their weekend, that what they did, right? That's a big problem when
right,
you're. But can
right,
you imagine getting them to collaborate and work on that together rather than work on it in silence and not look over your shoulder and don't cheat?
right. And how much more would they get out of it?
How much more would they get at, and what
Yeah.
better people they would be? And how about that sort of helping each other and going, hey, Allegra, I think you might have written that wrong. Da da da. And
Sure.
I
They're
mean
all
that's
bringing a little
great
something to
work.
the table. I mean, when you were talking about the high percentage of the prison population, with dyslexia, and then the entrepreneurs on the other side, and then I was kind of thinking through as you were talking about that, I'm thinking, well, some of this has to do, I think, with we all want to belong somewhere. Your saving grace, as you know, was the Prince's Trust. You got to have an identity, you got to provide value, you got to develop your self-worth, and you got to have community all in one place where you didn't sound like you were getting that
Yeah,
anywhere else in your life, right? And someone ends up in jail, they maybe just didn't have that, right? They maybe were just as smart, maybe were, and in a way just as driven. It's just that the vehicle ended up being, something bad, right? Something illegal that got them put there. And so it does kind of make sense because they'd be frustrated, they'd feel isolated already. They might
yeah,
have some of those same traits as the explorer, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it kind of makes sense. It also is really cool that you guys are pivoting that into, well, let's get back to what the right track would have been, right? I mean, before all of this happened, I met a guy. I remember, um, I was doing some work with Tony Robbins, and I was at one of his seminars. And there was a kid there, and he's telling his story, and he was a drug dealer. He was a drug dealer from I'm gonna just omit the city, but a large U.S. city, and he got shot in the head, and a bullet came in his head and it exited out the other side, and he ended up in the hospital. He obviously made a recovery because that's where I met him, but this kid had an amazing business mind, and he figured it out when he was in prison. I don't know if he had mentors or if he figured it out on his own, but he started reading, he started getting the personal development books, and he's doing amazing now, and I've seen him at multiple seminars, and he's coaching other people now. I mean, not just prisoners, but like business people and stuff on their mindset, right? And he had it in him the whole time. I don't know if he had dyslexia or not, but I mean, just the point of some of those same traits that it might take to. I don't know if you ever read a book called Freakonomics before, but you have, yeah. I remember in the first one there was something like there's one about being a drug dealer, why most drug dealers live at their mother's house or something like that. You know what I mean? And they were explaining the whole hierarchy of the system. And it just reminded me when I talked to him of just how good his business skills were. There were several sets of leadership underneath him. There were street soldiers. There was, finance. There was all of it.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, and this is what I think people don't recognize. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to be a criminal, by the way, a
Right.
lot of effort. And you're talking about someone who was dealing drugs. Can you imagine someone who sits and strategizes around how they break into a bank or do that's a startup in itself, right? They're
Right. Right.
resource investigating, they're finding the people, they're sitting down, they're building a strategy, they are giving out certain tasks to people based upon what they believe they will be good or bad at. And then they go and ultimately try and execute this strategy. And some of them get caught and go to jail, and some of them landed and do well. And then, unfortunately for them, success leads to wanting more, and they keep on going until eventually they do get caught,
Right.
right?
Right.
But it's a blueprint, isn't it? It's a blueprint for what it takes to do this stuff, to be curious and to innovate in that way. I think that curiosity is still there if you're a 14-year-old drug dealer on the streets of New York. So I grew up in a very poor part of London, and I definitely had friends that are, I don't know where one of them or two of them are now, but they definitely were in prison. I definitely have one friend that ended up dead at age 16. And I would say they definitely had entrepreneurial spirit looking back at it now. It
Sure.
led them in the wrong directions that led to the wrong path. But as you say, I was really fortunate. I had a very supportive mother, and I had a charity that gave me purpose. And we all know, I mean, you talk about doing some work with Tony Robbins. I mean, if Tony Robbins could write down one word on a post-it and sell it, it would probably be the value of purpose, right?
Yeah.
And you need that age 5 or age 105, because a life without that purpose is quite difficult, quite lonely.
Yeah. I think it's purpose and then directly related to like the power of your identity, and how you see yourself. Right. And so without those things, it's crazy. I mean, people generally join gangs for the right reasons. I think is they're looking for connection. They're looking
Yeah.
for what I mean. Like their brain at least is trying to take them in the right direction. Now, what they're doing in there is obviously not the right stuff to be doing, but they're doing it because they have human needs and they're trying to fill them. The same way we are if we go to a hot yoga class, right? Like I mean, it's no different, really.
I agree. And look, I mean, I'm really fortunate that I've got to go into these prisons and talk to these people. And it amazes me how society is so quick to write them off by the way they look and what they've done in the past. We shouldn't spend too much time on it, I'm sure, on this podcast, but we all know what's going on at a much more senior level across the world right now,
Right.
with some hideous crimes being committed by people that don't look like they belong in prison, and as such, it seems to go a long time undetected. Even when it is detected, it seems to go a long time uncharged. And even when it goes a long time uncharged, and it gets charged, sometimes it takes a long time to see any real meaningful punishment. And we really need to consider ourselves as a society, at a society level, on why we believe it's okay to put people in these categories. If you've got a shaven head and tattoos on your neck, then you deserve everything you get. But if you wear a suit and have been a patron of a charity for 10 years while committing your crime, we're not too sure what you deserve yet.
Sure.
We'll sit on the fence.
And the one that was the in the suit with the 10 years with the charity also has the good lawyers and knows the legal loopholes, and it's a system that, yeah, favors white collar crime, for sure. Um, I really appreciate you coming on. You have such a cool story, and I love speaking with people who've taken their, I don't want to say good fortune, because sometimes when you say that, it sounds like you just got lucky. I mean, you've obviously done built a tremendous career in life. But to take that now and to really impact the world and to impact your community in a better way is just really, really cool.
Well, thank you. And I really, and I mean it. I know a lot of people say it, but I really appreciate you giving me the platform to share what I believe is a really important message. And, I like to try and finish every podcast with saying, this isn't about book sales for me. This is about trying to help. So if there's anybody listening or viewing any of the media you put out, and they can't afford a copy of the book, if they find a way of reaching me on LinkedIn or my website, which is simply my name, I will get them a copy in their desired format for free. So if anybody really believes that they will benefit from it and can't afford it, do reach out to me. And for those that can afford it, or just believe that it will help somebody, just send them a link, and let them find their way to it, or find their way to more podcasts like this. And I just hope that it helps as many people as possible.
Amazing. Thank you, Jamie. And we'll put all those links, of course, in the show notes. So you guys, if you're listening, you'll be able to find Jamie's book there and find Jamie there. So thanks again, sir. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for your time.